Clearly, how to make yourself the least popular person at any Jewish community event is to stop when people are catching up, schmoozing. Let's call it schmoozing. Actually, it's the second least popular. If I was to interrupt later when there's food and drink, then I know I could be in trouble. So, good evening. If you are sitting, can you hear me okay? Yeah. If you are sitting on a row where there's a few spare seats, and those spare seats are in the middle, and you're at the end, just shuffle along a little so that the latecomers can find their way in without stepping on your feet. There we go. If I could also ask you to please turn any mobile phones or any other devices onto silent. Feel free to take photos and video clips unless any of the speakers ask you not to, but just keep the flash off so we don't blind anybody when they're up here. And that's really your cue now to settle down nice and quietly, and I will say a couple of words of welcome. I am Raymond Simonson. I'm the very proud CEO of JW3, the only Jewish community centre and arts and cultural centre of its kind in the UK. It's a pleasure to welcome so many familiar faces back here and to see so many people who I've never met before, which I'm assuming for some of you it's your first time here. So if it is your first time, just give us a little whoop. It's a 25% whoop. I've got an ear for it. Okay. So welcome for your first time at JW3, and I hope it won't be your last. It's such an honour and a pleasure to be here today, particularly because this is not my event. Right? I'm not running it. I've just been asked to say a couple of words of welcome and introduce the speakers throughout the evening. And to be honest, I get asked to do a lot of things in the community, and I've had to learn to politely say no. But when somebody asks you to do something for JCORE, or when somebody asks you to do something for Edie, you don't say no, right? I think we all know that. And actually, that's because she's one of the most remarkable leaders in the community that I've ever had the pleasure to work with in the 30 or so years that I've been involved working in the community. So this is a personal pleasure to stand up here tonight. Because we are here for two reasons. We're here to celebrate and to mark the launch of HIAS+JCORE in the UK, and also to celebrate 46 years of outstanding leadership of Dr. Edie Friedman. And we're going to do both of those here tonight. Yeah, that does deserve a cheer. It's those of you in the audience, those of you here that are Jewish and recently celebrated the festival of Purim, think about this as the opposite of when we hear the name Haman, we boo. When we hear the name Edie Friedman, we just cheer. So every time throughout the evening you hear her name, just feel free to just break into a spontaneous cheer. I could see she's just looking embarrassed about that now, but she's going to have to enjoy it. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first two people on the stage. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of them, and then I will slip away and they will step up. I'm going to invite up Mark Hetfield and Adam Rose. Some of you know them, but I'll just let you know who they are. Mark first joined HIAS in 1989. He was a caseworker in Rome. He's worked for the US Immigration and Naturalization Service, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, a large law firm as an immigration attorney, and he's had multiple roles at HIAS over the years. That's just a very short bit. There are many, many more parts to his CV than that. He was named the president and CEO of HIAS in 2013, and since then he's led the transformation of the organization from helping refugees because they were Jewish to helping refugees because we are Jewish. He's a frequent commentator and writer on refugee issues, on television, on radio, newspapers and other media outlets, and it's a real pleasure to welcome him here to JW3. And Adam Rose is a solicitor. He's a partner at Mishkon Dereya. He's an absolute mensch from my experience. He's been a trustee of JCORE since 2014, so he's had a long involvement. And like some of the very best people I know in our community, I'm very biased, Adam is an Essex Jew. Like some of the very best people, I'm just saying. I don't know what you mean. Born in Southend, although unlike the rest of us who come from the Essex Jewish community, he spent his primary school years in Sao Paulo, Brazil, whereas I was in Gants Hill, so it's not really... Anyway, after studying law and accounting at Manchester University, he took a sabbatical year like so many of our best and brightest leaders, he took a sabbatical year as the National Secretary of UJS, the Union of Jewish Students in the UK. He's also a trustee currently of the Jewish Youth Fund and UJS and of Masorti Judaism. And I personally think we can trace back his love of Jewish common organisational life to the fact that, as far as I understand it, he met his wife Nicola at a HIAS+JCORE Freshers event at Manchester University playing table tennis at Hillel House. Is that true? So there you go. It was a Freshers event, from a Freshers event all the way through to chairing and being a trustee of multiple organisations. Mark and Adam, please give them a warm welcome to the stage.
Thank you, thank you. Good evening. I'm absolutely delighted to see you here tonight and see so many of you here. As Raymond said, I've got two topics to address. First, why HIAS+JCORE and what's our purpose? And second, Edie. I meant to whoop, remember. Let me start with HIAS+JCORE. JCORE exists to be the Jewish voice in the UK on race and for asylum seekers and refugees. We're one of the very few significant organisations in the Jewish community that is entirely outward-facing. Our beneficiaries are not the Jewish community or Israel, but those from other communities with whom we seek to build anti-racist bonds and for whose asylum-seeking and refugee members we seek to improve rights. We both campaign and we do. We organise demonstrations and petitions. We have quiet meetings with politicians of all stripes. We organise rabbis, communal leaders, and concerned members of our community to write to editors. We educate our youngsters. We raise money for clothes and other necessities that our country, the sixth wealthiest in the world, seems unable or unwilling to provide. And we do as well. Our JUMP programme, which puts together adult befrienders and young unaccompanied asylum seekers and refugees, is something that I consider very special. Often our JUMP befriender is the only person providing of themselves unpaid to a young person who has turned up in the UK with no family to support them. We will be expanding JUMP's reach and adding to it other practical programmes to support refugees and asylum seekers. Our Refugee Doctors programme aims to provide mentoring by NHS doctors to refugee doctors whose qualifications we don't recognise, but who want to explore how they might get back to doing what their original training in their original country prepared them to do. And we're living in extraordinarily difficult times, where our Home Secretary dreams of sending people who've been trafficked to the UK off to a continent many will have fled. JCORE has been fighting these causes for some 45 years, and tonight sees the formal launch of HIAS+JCORE. HIAS, as Mark Hetfield will tell you, is an extraordinary organisation with its own 100 years of history, activism, and doing. And in joining forces with HIAS, JCORE aims to get into a position where it can do more campaigning, and more doing. A louder voice, a bigger reach. Not just talking, but real tachlis. And what HIAS+JCORE is about is leading the UK Jewish community's voice on anti-racism and asylum and refugee issues, amplifying the voices of support from our community for those communities and for the individuals who can benefit from our support, and doing more and bigger. So tonight sees the launch of an organisation that has existed for 45 years, under a new name. HIAS+JCORE will be led by Rabbi David Mason, with his Deputy Director, Amos Schonfield. Both are passionate campaigners for the very issues that JCORE works hard to support, and I'm delighted that they have agreed to join us. I'm delighted also at the hugely positive feedback I've had from around the community on their appointments. With its new arrangements with HIAS+JCORE gains access to a more global platform too, to keep its place in our community and country, but also to be part of a worldwide campaign and a group of activists. And I welcome the chance for us to work alongside campaigners in the Americas and Europe and around the world. But it's important that as a chairperson, I note one thing very clearly. We are a UK charity responsible primarily for our own fundraising and our own development. So whilst tonight is not an overt fundraiser, although it won't stop any of you from donating, tonight is a celebration and a recommitment. In all the newness of our coming together with HIAS, one of the key things that we will work to ensure is that HIAS+JCORE maintains its unique Britishness. So talking of people who are uniquely British, let me turn to Edie. Dr. Edie Friedman came to the UK in the 1970s, inspired by her experience of the American Civil Rights Movement, and wondered what could be done here and what she could do. And in setting up JCORE, and then in running it, in inspiring countless of us to join the campaign, to do something useful, to give of our time and of our money, to make a JCORE that the wider non-Jewish community of organizations working for better race relations and for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees recognizes as representing a very Jewish perspective, Edie has been the engine of all of this. As I've said elsewhere, there are few people who can be referred to by one name only: Madonna, Beyonce, Kylie, and to that list, we add Edie. Mark.
Thank you, Adam. Adam told me not to speak any longer than Fidel Castro would speak, so I'm going to try to abide by that. As a leader of HIAS, I'm often asked what I like best about my job, and the answer often surprises people. I do love working with refugees to help them build a new life, which I've been doing since I was at HIAS in Rome in 1989 as a caseworker. But the best part about working at HIAS, the characteristic that defines HIAS and distinguishes it from every other international refugee organization, is knowing that we are welcoming refugees in partnership with Jewish communities across the world. What I like best about HIAS is not that we are working as an organization, but that we are working as part of a movement to help refugees, not because they are Jewish, as we once did, but because we are Jewish. And while HIAS is here tonight, combining forces with JCORE, which has been part of the movement for refugees since it was founded by Dr. Edie Friedman in 1976, we certainly consider other British Jewish organizations like World Jewish Relief and Renee Cassin to be partners in this endeavor. As part of the global Jewish movement for refugees, we are proud to fulfill the commandment, which appears 36 times in the Torah, more often than any other. You must regard the stranger who lives with you as the native born among you. You are to love the stranger as yourself, for you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. This is not actually the first time that HIAS has come into the UK. In 1927, we combined forces with the Jewish Colonization Association and the German organization Emig Direct, and we formed HIASM together. That relationship lasted through the Second World War until 1945. And the last time I came to London was in April 2019 at the invitation of the Association of Jewish Refugees to speak at the 80th anniversary of the Kindertransport. This event was particularly meaningful to me because my best friend, one former HIAS client, Manny Lindenbaum, was rescued from Poland by the Kindertransport in 1939, together with his brother Siegfried. Their parents and sister Ruth were murdered at Auschwitz. But eventually, HIAS brought Manny and Siegfried from England to the United States to reunite them with their aunt and uncle, who were chicken farmers in New Jersey. Today, Manny is 90, but I'm still riding bikes with him. And every time on our bike rides, we hear someone with a British accent. He stops and he says, "I want to tell you that your country did a very good thing. Your country saved my life, and you should be proud of that." Manny's story to me is a personification as to why HIAS does what we do. It's the fulfillment of the commandment, reminding us that we really do know the heart of the stranger, because we were strangers ourselves. We don't have to look back to the Exodus from Egypt to remember that. And this event is important to me. The event that I spoke at in 2019 with the Association of Jewish Refugees, because it was the first time that I connected with JCORE and with Adam and Edie. And it was that meeting which eventually led to tonight and the creation of HIAS and JCORE in the UK. And we have to say there is no time more important for HIAS and JCORE to launch this partnership than now. In December 2020, during the pandemic, the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, and HIAS signed UNHCR's first global memorandum of understanding with any faith-based NGO. And HIAS works in partnership with UNHCR on 5 continents. HIAS's strongest asset is our connection with Jewish communities across the globe, as there needs to be a global Jewish response to the global refugee crisis. And it is that connection that we bring to JCORE. Instead of living up to the promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, by the way, was drafted by a Jew, Rene Cassin, which declared that the human right, that seeking asylum is in fact a human right, there is also not only a global movement for refugees, which we are part of, but there's a global movement, even by democratic countries, to undermine the Refugee Convention and to undermine the right to seek and enjoy asylum. In the United States last night, I'm proud to share with you that HIAS presented 5,100 comments from community members across the United States protesting the Biden administration's effort to bar people at our borders from seeking asylum and to push asylum seekers south. Last night, some of you were in front of Parliament protesting the UK government's efforts to banish asylum seekers to Rwanda, following an initiative which, let's be frank, was first piloted by Israel, a pilot that was struck down by the High Court of Israel, which is itself under attack today by the Israeli government. Last month, incoming Director of JCORE, Rabbi David Mason, visited HIAS in Israel and saw firsthand our work to preserve the right to seek asylum in that country, in the Jewish state. And we all know that Europe is now doing its best to return asylum seekers to Turkey. The Refugee Convention of 1951 was written out of the ashes of the Holocaust to ensure that never again would anyone be trapped inside their country of persecution. As Jews, we have an obligation to protect the human right to seek and enjoy asylum, and doing so requires a local response and a global response. HIAS, joining with JCORE, is proud to be a part of that global response, working together with our other partners across the globe and here in the UK to welcome the stranger. Thank you again for joining us for this really important occasion.
I was kind of hoping that, given that it's a marriage between 2 organisations, that I would come up here now with a glass wrapped in a cloth, and you would, but apparently health and safety, so I'm really sorry that we can't have that dramatic moment. Okay, I think it would have looked good, right? Okay, it is now my real pleasure to introduce to you a very, very special guest for this evening, who is going to speak, who is going to show a short film, and then has very kindly agreed to open the floor to questions. I hope you knew that. Yes, okay. Good. You have very kindly agreed to do that. And we will take questions at the end. There will be someone with a microphone, so please keep a lookout for the microphone. Yalda Hakim, I'm sure a name known to many of you here. An award-winning foreign correspondent and documentary filmmaker who was recently, and we should wish you a hearty mazal tov, congratulations from everyone in the community on your new role as chief presenter on BBC News. Born in Afghanistan, fled with her family as a result of the Soviet invasion and emigrated to Australia. She's reported extensively from some of the world's most dangerous and difficult places, including, for example, Iraq and Syria, to cover the rise and fall of so-called Islamic State, and in the world's youngest nation, South Sudan, documenting the brutal civil war there. She's covered the US presidential elections in 2008, 2012, 2020. She's reported from Turkey following the failed coup attempt. She's covered the aftermath of the earthquake in Nepal, kidnappings by drug cartels in Mexico, and jihadism in Sweden. So this should be a very easy audience. Have you ever taken questions from a solely Jewish audience before? Because that training is really going to come in handy. In 2018, Yalda launched, and this is just so inspirational, the Yalda Hakim Foundation. And if you haven't heard of it, I really, really encourage you to look it up, because what you're doing with that foundation is just remarkable. Supporting the education and professional advancement of exceptionally talented young women in Afghanistan. In particular, those from economically and socially disadvantaged backgrounds, through scholarships and internships and mentoring. Absolutely inspiring. Do look it up. Please give a warm welcome to our special guest.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so grateful for those kind words, and I'm so grateful for this invitation tonight. Before we begin, I have a short film that I recently shot in Afghanistan about 3.5, 4 weeks ago. So I'd like to show you that, and then we can carry on with the conversation. A woman as well as a professor to ask them how they're coping. Have a look. Classrooms empty. Library deserted. This university used to be full of female students. No more. Edicts issued by the Taliban government added one more thing to the list women can't do.
I don't have the right for working. I don't have the right for existence. I don't have the right for being a woman anymore. It's a crime. Please.
Naila Mirza was weeks away from getting her degree. The ban means she's left with nothing.
Suddenly everything changed just in a matter of a day. I used to say it proudly to everyone that I'm finishing this journey of studying medicine. But now I wake up and I watch the clock's tick-tock.
Since the Taliban takeover in August 2021, women have been pushed out of the public eye. Most girls over the age of 12 haven't been able to return to school. Women have been banned from parks and gyms and can only travel with a male guardian. Despite this, women have been speaking out. It's rare, however, to see Afghan men joining them. But Professor Mashal, who runs a university with 450 female students, says he's had enough.
Leave these women alone. In the last year and a half, all their policies have been focused on women covering up, girls not going to school. There are bigger issues we need to deal with.
In a rare act of defiance, the professor tore his academic records live on television, going viral on social media. He asks, where are all the men?
I call on fathers to take the hands of their daughters and walk them to school, even if the gates are shut, even if they are not allowed in. They should do this daily. It's the least they can do to prove they are men.
Many of those who have criticized the new rulers have been arrested.
I know what I am doing is dangerous. Every morning, I say goodbye to my mother and wife. I tell them I may not return, but I am ready and willing to sacrifice my life for 20 million Afghan women and girls.
Thank you very much, Naila John, for joining us. In every interview I've done, Naila has said she will continue to fight for her rights. But this is the shot as she fled the country.
It's over for me. I mean, staying here and staying dead is the same thing.
The ban is temporary, says the Taliban government. They claim they're trying to create an Islamic learning environment aligned with Sharia practices. But until more men stand up, will anything change? Marzia Babakhel, a former Afghan judge who now lives in exile in Manchester, talked to me about the challenges that That's just a very small snapshot of life for millions of Afghan women and girls today. It's been 556 days since Afghan girls have been denied the right to an education. When the Taliban swept to power in
August 2021. They waited 3 or 4 weeks, and in that time they said to all boys and girls, women across the country, to stay at home, to wait until there'd be further announcements made. Around 15th of September, they issued a statement to say all boys across the country would be allowed to return to their schools, but girls over the age of 12 would have to remain at home until the environment was more suitable. And as I said, it's now been more than 550 days, and Afghan girls continue to wait. This week marked the return for schools after the winter break. And what's incredibly heartbreaking for me to see and hear every time I speak to Afghan girls is they remain hopeful. Their spirit, in a strange way, hasn't been broken. Every time the school year starts or a new term starts, they hope that the environment that the Taliban are talking about is now suitable for them. They say they're willing to completely cover their faces. They're willing to, like before, for schools to be segregated, which it already was. They're willing even for their curriculums to change because they're so desperate and hungry for an education, a right that's been denied. And many of these young girls, I describe them as sort of the quintessential 9/11 generation because they were born or they were just a few years old when the US-led invasion took place. And they have only ever known the sort of levels of freedom that was available during the previous regime. It wasn't perfect, but they had a voice, and occasionally that voice was allowed to be heard. And now they're silent. They've been completely pushed out of the public eye. In the last 6 months, mothers have been told that going to public parks is not allowed. They're not allowed to take their children to public parks. They're not allowed to go to gyms. Universities have been closed. They've been told that they cannot travel long distances within the country or travel overseas without a male chaperone. In fact, at one point they put out an edict and said unless it was absolutely necessary, women should refrain from leaving their homes. They've also been told that female aid workers cannot work with international aid agencies, which makes it incredibly difficult when millions are on the brink of starvation or on the brink of famine. And so how do those women get access to aid? How do children get access to aid when women can't deliver it? And most of the men in the household won't allow for a man to deliver the aid. And for people like Dr. Naila, who you just saw in my clip, 25 years old, so defiant, fearless. Every time I spoke to her after the Taliban swept to power, she was adamant that she wouldn't leave the country, that she would face the tyranny, she would face their oppression, and she would try and bring about change. And she had what she believed that few others had, and that was the prospect of getting a degree and the fact that she was working as a junior doctor, training in hospitals. So when that door shut in her face, she felt she'd run out of options, and like so many others, she had no choice but to flee the country. She's now currently in Iran, trying to seek asylum in the West. And so many Afghan women are desperately looking for a way out, and they don't have a way out. And those who have managed to come to places like the UK, many of them remain in hotels. They're trying to carry on with their lives and try and find a life for themselves here in this country. It's a very emotional journey for me every time I return to Afghanistan, because of course, for me, it's not one generation ago or 2 generations ago that my family experienced migration to another country. My parents fled the country when I was just 6 months old on horseback into Pakistan, and they were managed to be lucky enough to get themselves to Australia, where I grew up, and I benefited in a great way from organizations like yours. My family did, and I was able to become a journalist. I was able to be educated, become a reporter, fulfill my dream of working for a news organization. I was then able to be poached and come to the UK and work for the BBC. And so when I return and I see women who are the same age as me, born in the same hospital as me, and now facing the prospect of no future, it is incredibly saddening and depressing. And Professor Mashal, who you saw, the man in that video who was standing up, soon after the video went out and that news story went out, Professor Mashal wanted to continue his campaign. He was arrested by the Taliban, and he spent several weeks in a Taliban prison. And like so many others who end up in a Taliban prison, they come out, they sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you never really know what happened to them on the inside, but they do fall silent. And today, we've also learned that another women's rights activist, education activist, Matila Wessa, is spending his second night in a Taliban prison. He has campaigned in some of the most remote parts of the country, taking on Taliban leaders, tribal elders, to try and help them understand that education for women and girls is a part of Islam, it's a part of Afghan culture, and it shouldn't be denied. So we're hoping that Matila Wessa will be released as soon as possible. But like so many others, when he does come out, will he still have the voice that he has had for the last several years in Afghanistan facing the Taliban? I'm so grateful for the work that your organizations do for the Afghan community. I know that many synagogues were full of clothing, food, nappies for the families who arrived in this country. So thank you for everything that the community has done for the Afghans who have arrived here. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to open up the floor and take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Is it? Hi. My name is Sarah Izal. I'm a trustee of JCORE, and thank you very much for this very eloquent presentation. You've touched a little bit on that, but I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your experience of speaking to the Afghan women or refugees in general who have arrived here since 2021, and what barriers they're facing, and how, is there anything that you think we should be doing in order to support them further and try to break down those barriers?
So you would have seen the news story today where the government has proposed to the refugees in the hotels to choose the housing that's offered to them so that they can leave these hotels. They have been in the hotels since they arrived. And unfortunately, I was talking to a few people here. There are other news events, and the Afghans themselves will say, have we been forgotten? They do feel a sense of betrayal. The women in Afghanistan and those who also have come to this country, of course they are grateful that they think about what's going on in Afghanistan and what's the Afghans who are stuck in the country are currently facing, from a humanitarian crisis to human rights issues to issues around security, because of course the security situation hasn't changed in the country either. We're still seeing groups like ISK launch large-scale attacks against minority groups in places like mosques and in markets and on government departments. But those who have come here are stuck in hotel rooms. And I have actually spoken to a number of rabbis who want to see what they can do, what the community can do to assist, so that they don't feel a sense of abandonment, they don't feel a sense of that they've been forgotten, and other refugee groups have managed to come to the country and have settled down in a better way than the Afghans have. So those challenges do remain, and I do know that World Jewish Relief is doing a huge amount of work. They are trying to rally around this and see what they can do to help, even in the assimilation process, because what's been difficult is there is a strange routine, even in the hotels that they're in. They've managed to find some kind of routine for themselves. They are sending their children to the local schools as well. So it's whether they then are uprooted and sent somewhere else. And I think there are those challenges as well. So there is so much that can be done. the foundation that I run, we don't do a huge amount of work in the UK. The bulk of the work that we do is now in the United States. We've created the largest refugee scholarship program in the US. So 250 students from the American University of Afghanistan were evacuated out of Afghanistan, and we sent them to the United States. In a strange way, they're very strict before they try and get people in. But once they're in, actually a lot of the support network rallied around them, and the scholarship program is valued at 40 million, and a lot of the support came from private donors, State Department, other governments who assisted to try and settle these students. I know there's a lot of young Afghans who went to universities whose education was disrupted when they came here, and they are desperately seeking scholarships as well. We have a small scholarship at Oxford University that we're trying to place a small number of students, but the requirements are actually, there's a lot of, they're very stringent in terms of requirements. So if there are people who are running universities or connected to universities who think that they can open up some scholarship programs, I think that will also be very helpful.
Hi, I'm Sarah Nathan from Refugees at Home. When the Afghans came out to this country, we wanted to host them. We wanted them not to go into hotels, and 1,200 people came forward, some from the Jewish community, some not, to volunteer to host. And the Home Office wouldn't let us. So they went into hotels, and now this announcement today comes, and people have been in hotels for 18 months. They a lot have mental health difficulties, a lot have big families, a lot are fixed where they are and have children in education. What would you suggest that organisations who want to support refugees, who want to support specifically Afghan refugees, could do at the moment in the light of this announcement today?
I know there's a lot of Afghan community groups, and it's worth partnering with them who are speaking to the refugees who are in these hotel rooms. I know what benefited my family, for example, was a strong connection to the wider community, whether that's through English language lessons, whether it's helping them with their children in terms of assimilation of their children, because it is a shock coming from that kind of environment and going through what they did when they were evacuated. It is a huge shock, and I don't think they have fully come to terms with how and why their country collapsed and how they have become homeless, stateless, essentially, and can't go back. Many of them have families who remain in the country. So they haven't sort of come to terms with it. And in fact, I realized my parents hadn't come to terms with it 40 years after they fled, until the fall of Kabul in 2021, when they were watching those images, and I realized that my parents were sort of really traumatized by what they'd been through, but actually never spoke about it, never wanted to discuss it, because the process of immigration is sort of challenging in itself, trying to navigate a society, trying to figure out how you get about and how you figure out a system is already challenging enough. You want to raise your children, you want to educate them, you want to make the most of those opportunities, so you don't deal with the mental health issues that come with fleeing. So a conversation, a chat with some of these women, community programs that might be developed for these groups and for these women who may feel isolated, may feel like they've been left behind, who are now being given these black and white options about what to do, might also help. But I do think connecting with the support networks that exist already in this country that are community-based already. There are a number of Afghan community groups that exist, and I think a connection with them, bypassing the Home Office and the structure that is in place, but those community groups are there, and so it's worth connecting with those groups, I think, as well.
Hi, Yalda. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's really inspiring. My name is Nina Morris Evans. I teach at a school nearby, a state comprehensive that happened to be selected to take in the whole Afghan refugee population in Camden.
Oh, wow.
So we've got a couple of hundred now in the school. I've got two questions, having kind of worked with them for the last year and a half. One is around a lot of the themes you're talking about really resonate. Like I see the trauma and in many different ways manifesting. One question is around what you were saying about relocation. Sometimes they kind of randomly, we teach them, we love them, we give them, what we can, and then they disappear. I wonder whether there's any role for teachers or for other institutions to fight more to keep them, and what you kind of think about that, or if you know of organizations that could offer support to keep them. And the second one is about sensitivity. So a lot of the girls they say they don't want to go to university, even if we can teach them English quickly enough, and how we sensitively might promote a raising of aspirations among people who might have not internalized some of those messages, and if there's anywhere that we should be looking to work with to do those things. Thank you.
I think a lot of that, just to answer your second question first, a lot of that comes from within the home. The pressure that these girls may face. I have spent a lot of time in secret schools in Afghanistan, underground schools that operate from basements. They're not necessarily teachers who are running these schools, they're mothers and they're other women who are doing other things, but they feel it's important to ensure that there's some semblance of learning throughout the day, rather than for these girls to completely lose hope and stay inside the homes. And I recently, when I was there 3 weeks ago, I met a young girl, she was 14, and she said to me, I'm dealing with the Taliban on the outside, and then I weirdly deal with the Taliban on the inside. And she was talking about her relationship with her father and how he didn't want her to go to this secret school on a daily basis. He was worried about the risks involved of making the journey as well to the secret school. But also, she said that they would give her a lot of tasks to do in the morning. So, sometimes she said, I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning so I could finish all the chores by 7 so that I could go to this secret school. So I think tapping in, having conversations with the parents, with the mums and the dads, giving them a sense that it's okay for your daughter to have aspirations in this country. It doesn't mean that the protection that you've tried to create, and the fear, it really comes from a place of fear, doesn't it? Wanting to stay within the community and stay with what you know, because you've already fled your safe space, so you're coming to the unknown. And it's so, giving them that space, I think, is really important. I've done that myself, even in this country, in terms of scholarships, and in Afghanistan, to say, if she learns, that means that prospects for your family become better as a whole. It benefits the entire family and generations to come. I do think it's incredibly sad that children become attached and they learn to open up and then they're moved on. I'm not sure exactly whether there are teachers' associations that can work directly with the community or with the Home Office or with the Department of Education to see if there's a way to create more protection around the children so that they're not moving around and being sort of destabilized in that way is incredibly unsettling. They've already moved once and come to another country, and then to be moved around multiple times from school to school is also hugely unsettling. So if there can be a way to keep them in the system, I think that's the one thing that these communities, the community is now grappling with in the hotels, because they do weirdly feel settled in that local community and they now have to uproot and go elsewhere. So, but thank you for everything that you're doing with your school. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Tashakur. I may not win points for the pronunciation, but I gave it a try. Okay, and now on to our star of the evening. You can have one whoop at the first mention of her name, but then let me carry on the introduction, or we'll never get there. We are here to celebrate and to honour you, Dr. Edie Friedman. Even a potted history would be too long to be able to give briefly. So I'm going to give the potted, very brief history. You all know, I think, that Edie was born in Chicago. And we know that as a student in the 1960s, She was heavily influenced by the civil rights and peace movements. She came to England to study in Leeds, and luckily for all of us and our entire community, she made it her home. She worked for Oxfam, she worked for the Community Relations Council in Ealing, West London. And then in 1976, can you believe it, 1976, Edie founded the Jewish Council for Racial Equality, JCORE, with the aim of providing a Jewish voice on race and asylum in the UK. And she has led that fantastic organisation that so many of you are involved in ever since. And over the next 46 years, JCORE campaigned, together with the UK's black and Asian communities, taken race equality education into Jewish schools, supported refugees and asylum seekers through innovative projects, and so much more. In 2008, Edie co-authored Reluctant Refuge, the story of asylum in Britain. She's also authored and co-authored a series of race equality education resources covering from primary school all the way through to adult age ranges. On a personal note, and you may not even remember this, but sometime in, I think, the mid-late 90s, when I first met you and when we were first introduced, I was working for the UJ. I was working in informal Jewish education, supporting youth movements and youth groups across the UK. And I was working on a project and trying to get my head around the fact that there wasn't enough kind of racism and anti-racism education going on in Jewish youth movements, and not enough black, non-Jewish and Jewish conversations going on amongst our youth. And Edie introduced me to, well, he's now Lord Simon Woolley, the founder of Operation Black Vote. I'm sure some of you know Simon. Introduced me to him, and he let me take him into Jewish schools and to Jewish youth groups, and we ran seminars, which Edie really inspired me and helped me work on. And I roll forward to 2020, and we went into lockdown and we closed this building and we moved everything online, you know, within a few days, and so many of you attended so many of the events. And when George Floyd was murdered and Black Lives Matter was really in the forefront of people's minds, we had a conversation and said, it's just not a big enough conversation in the Jewish community. And I said to Edie, we'll do an event now, we'll do it online, we'll lead the Jewish community in this. And Edie helped us put together a brilliant panel. And again, it was wonderful to invite back Lord Woolley. And I introduced him at the event, and he said, much to my surprise, yes, I remember working with Raymond. He took me to the Jewish youth movements back in the 90s, thanks to Edie. And it was amazing, that connection. And that panel with you and with David Lammy and with Nadine, who I think I saw is in the room tonight, Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, over 5,500 people joined us for an online event that really set the tone of the conversation in the community. And that's what Edie does. She sets the tone of the important conversations in the community about these issues. So without further ado, you didn't come here to hear me. We came here to hear Dr. Edie Friedman.
Because the podium and Edie are about the same size, it was decided that perhaps the best way to hear me is if I sit. So thank you to Adam and to Mark and to Yalda. Where is Yalda? For so movingly reminding us why we do what we do. So absolutely, thank you. And good evening to all of you. It's really wonderful to see how many people were able to join us this evening. So though a number of things and activities have been mentioned by previous speakers, I'd like to use the next 10 minutes to give you a sort of snapshot of the last 46 3/4 years, looking at how JCORE began, some of the things we've achieved, and some hopes and challenges that we have for the future. So how did it all start? So let me take you back to an autumn day at the end of the 1960s. And I know many of you will not necessarily remember the 1960s, but I was then a young Jewish American woman who arrived in Leeds for what was known as the junior year abroad. And I brought with me many memories of that momentous decade in the United States when many Jewish communities and individuals joined in the fight for a more just world. whether it was through the civil rights movement, combating poverty, or demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. And though I had no intention of doing anything similar here, my intention was short-lived. For a while, I looked for an equivalent activity I could be a part of, but I couldn't find it. So the question was, if I wanted to get involved, do I work outside the Jewish community or do I start something within it? I decided on the latter. I wrote dozens of letters, and remember there was no email, even computers then, was given £50, which then also was a lot of money, which paid for 4 return trips to London, where I introduced myself to rabbis and to Jewish parliamentarians and asked them to support my vision of a new organization, one that would rekindle that proud tradition of Jewish social activism and draw on our experience to provide a Jewish voice on race and asylum issues within the UK. So that's how JCORE began. The big question was what to do first. So I started by seeking out kindred spirits in the synagogue, at the local community relations council, at interfaith meetings, even my local yoga class. And with a handful of like-minded people, reached out to other communities in Leeds. And the first thing we did was to put on a Caribbean Asian Jewish festival. We catered for 50 people, and 600 people turned up. And at the next one, 1,000. We stepped up the catering a bit. And these events established part of our DNA, which is working for race equality in partnership with other minorities. What happens then in the process is that we learn about each other, break down some of the many social stereotypes we have about each other, and hopefully move beyond the small talk. As a result of those partnerships, we set up a Black Asian Jewish discussion group, which gained hugely in popularity once we introduced breakfast. A small group of us would meet around a breakfast table to discuss a wide range of issues, large and small, the kind of contact between our 3 communities that does not, and maybe still does not, happen often enough. And we turned some of those breakfasts into a public Black Asian Jewish conversation. For example, the former chief rabbi, the late Jonathan Sachs, and Paul Boateng, who was then MP in Brent. Out of those breakfasts came the idea of creating a traveling exhibition about the experience and history of Black, Asian, and Jewish people in Britain. It was called Connections, because we didn't want to compete with each other, who's had the worst time, slavery or Holocaust, but we wanted to look at some of the human connections between us. So the exhibitions explored what we had in common, both the good and the bad stuff. It was seen by over 10,000 people, including hundreds of school children in more than 50 venues, museums, schools, libraries across the UK. Among many of the positive comments came the idea that somehow the Connections exhibition empowered both young people and teachers to actually talk about racism. Many of JCORE's projects have been inspired by our own refugee history. When Vietnamese refugees arrived here in the 1970s, we ran English classes and social activities to help them integrate into life in West Yorkshire. And in the 1980s, in response to the war in Bosnia, we set up a mobile counseling unit for Bosnian refugees. We also introduced counselors who had worked with Holocaust survivors to therapists working with traumatized refugees today. It's amazing to even think about the war in Bosnia and how much activity there was around it, and it's so much part of yesterday's refugee history. Back in the 1930s, Jewish doctors who had fled the Nazis struggled to be accepted by the British medical establishment. Reminded of their stories, we ran a series of workshops for recent refugee doctors to either help them to requalify or at least help them to use their skills to best possible use. To our amazement, 100 medics turned up at the first workshop, and a further 100 or more to the next 2. The result was JCORE's Refugee Doctors Project, which helped put the issue onto the medical agenda and included a published guide and more recently a mentoring scheme where we match up a British-trained doctor with a refugee doctor. And because many of the doctors were Muslim, this turned out to be another way of doing Muslim-Jewish dialogue. Inspired by another story of the 1930s, the Kindertransport, we set up JUMP, a befriending scheme for young refugees arriving in the UK without their families, living often isolated and precarious lives. We pair them with a trained volunteer befriender. They meet every fortnight for a year or more, building a relationship of trust and often enduring friendships. And as our volunteers tell us, they benefit as much from the scheme as the young people do. And it was an absolute lifeline to them during lockdown when we raised money in order to supply them with IT equipment so that we would stop some of their further isolation, which obviously lockdown would have contributed to. Other recent projects include Young Neighbors, which brought together Jewish and Muslim teenagers together for social action to help refugees. Our Afghan Emergency Appeal, which raised over £25,000 to help provide essential items to families stranded in hotels, nappies, baby milk, and even dual language dictionaries, which we gave to the children, but proved to be very beneficial and helpful to their parents as well. And currently in development, Women to Women, a telephone befriending service for Afghan refugee women who are stuck in hotels. Alongside this work, we have continually spoken out on race equality and refugee rights. We campaigned increasingly against harsh asylum bills on the streets, in the press, and on the air. Yvette Cooper MP, now Shadow Home Secretary, referred to JCORE in the 2016 immigration bill debate. And so did the then Prime Minister David Cameron when asked on the Today program his response to a letter we had sent him about Calais. I have to tell you, he didn't have very much to say. And more recently, I debated with the former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe on Radio 4 about sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. We've lobbied for the rights of asylum seekers to work and support their families and for the right of child refugees to family reunion. We raised awareness of institutional racism in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We're involved in the campaign for the memorial to the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. And we encourage our community to take action on all of these issues, from writing to the press, to lobbying MPs, to joining in demonstrations and taking delegations from across the community to present petitions to Downing Street. And now, of course, we are facing our biggest challenge, the so-called illegal migration bill, also known as Stop the Boats Bill. I think it's important that we call out this legislation and the Rwandan scheme for what they are, truly shameful. As well as campaigning for refugees and asylum seekers, we also provide practical support with basic necessities such as toiletries, warm coats, new underwear, and food, not only to provide these goods, but also to help people restore some of their sense of lost dignity. And of course, we have a responsibility not only to stand up for the rights of others, but also to transmit those values to the next generation. So we've developed a series of unique race equality education resources aimed primarily, though not exclusively, at Jewish schools for preschool, primary, and secondary age children, because we know how important it is for Jewish children and adults to learn about all forms of racism, not just anti-Semitism. We've trained teachers to use these resources, and we've run many ourselves in both Jewish and non-Jewish schools, in synagogues, and youth groups. Again, inspired by the Kindertransport, we ran a school's oral history project training secondary school-age pupils to conduct video interviews with survivors and build a website with their videos and their stories. And we've produced education resources, both online and in print, on the transatlantic slave trade, on the story of Stephen Lawrence, and on the debate over statues. And every Passover, we send out a Seder supplement to help people make the connection between freedom from slavery in Egypt and freedom from oppression today. And to remind ourselves of Britain's rather checkered history of welcoming refugees, and it's really important that we bring home that point about how checkered and less than honest and positive has our history been. Together with the journalist Reva Klein, we wrote a book called, as was mentioned, Reluctant Refuge, the story of asylum in the UK, which was published by the British Library and launched by Baroness Helena Kennedy. So that's a snapshot of what we've done. The question is, what have we achieved? I believe that JCORE has come to be recognized as the Jewish voice on race and asylum, both within and outside our community. Outside it, we're invited to the table for national discussions, and we provide a sort of rent-a-rabbi service for various platforms. JCORE has many friends and allies among members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, among chief executives of refugee charities and anti-racism organizations, and among leaders across Black and Asian communities. I'm proud that over the past 46 years, we have challenged the Jewish community to take action on race and asylum issues in the UK, paved the way for many practical initiatives that have sprung up in the community, and educated at least 2 generations of young people about racism and their responsibility to do something about it. And so what are my hopes for the future? I hope that JCORE's new partnership with HIAS will continue this legacy and build on it, and in so doing, will be bold and take risks. So let me leave you with 3 wishes and 3 challenges. My first wish is to see race equality and refugee education embedded in the school curriculum in all Jewish schools. My second is to raise awareness of the full extent of racial inequality in Britain, for it is simply unacceptable that Black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women, or that more than half of all Black children live in poverty. The third is to press the government to implement all the recommendations of the report into the Windrush scandal so that victims finally get their justice. And here are my 3 challenges for my successors. First, to rehabilitate the very idea of asylum and hold this government to account to show that we are still a country that honors that right. To make sure that we're supporting refugees and asylum seekers is not left entirely to the voluntary sector, that the government must play its role, and my golly, does it have a big role to play. And thirdly, to sustain action beyond all these crises. Do you remember the response to the image of Alan Kurdi washed up on a Turkish beach? Or the reaction to the killing of George Floyd? How do we keep up that momentum when the crisis is no longer in front of us on our screens? And I'm going to sneak in a final challenge, if I may, to the new organization, to ensure that social justice remains at the heart of Jewish values. This is crucial not only for our own identity, but also so that the outside world recognizes our place and that of other minority communities in helping to shape today's Britain. It's been a privilege to have developed this work over the past 46 years. I, of course, was a toddler when I started. And, of course, I couldn't have done it without the fantastic support of staff and volunteers, trustees, patrons, friends, and allies. Too many to mention by name. So thank you to all of you who are here who fall into these categories. And, of course, to my family, who've also had to live with JCORE for many years. Of course, I'll be sad to be leaving, but I look forward to the new chapter of the JCORE story and taking up my role as its honorary president. So now, over to you, David and Amos. Thank you.
Cheers for Edie, okay?
I want to announce tonight the launch of a new annual award for contribution to the causes of race relations and for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees, which we're honoured to call the Lord Dubs Award. Sadly, Lord Dubs can't be here tonight, but I know how delighted he is that the first winner of the Lord Dubs Award is Dr. Edie Friedman, for her tireless work over many years for racial justice and for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees. Congratulations, Edie.
Fitting mentor and really hero that all of us should be very proud of the work that Lord Dubs has done. So thank you very much.
The second thing, and finally, I'd like to do is to invite Anna Isaacs, Edie's daughter, to come up to present Edie with a more personal gift. Anna.
Hi, everyone. As Edie's daughter, I've grown up with JCORE. In a way, JCORE's been an older sibling, occupying a space at the top of the house, but very much an object of pride rather than one of envy. And although over the last several years I haven't been quite as intimately connected with the day-to-day runnings of JCORE, it's had a really profound and long-lasting impact on my life and on the things that I've chosen to do. So as JCORE's youngest sibling, I just wanted to give you this book of pictures and tributes from many of your admirers. I thought I would just read one. I don't want to embarrass you, but one of these messages would be nice to read. So this is from Jason Strelitz, so I don't think it's here, but was one of JCORE's chairs. From the first time I met Edie, I felt I was with someone unique in our Jewish community. She wore her values so loudly and proudly. She is still the very meaning of indefatigable, persisting for years and years with passion, eloquence, and such a strong sense of justice. She has always taken on unfashionable causes, which she knew were right, seemingly undaunted by criticism from any direction, sometimes seemingly a lone voice. The concrete achievements from dialogue work to the Refugee Doctor's Guide to mentoring are many, but her strongest legacy, and the one I know JCORE will maintain, is the moral voice of justice, community, and solidarity. Thanks, Edie. You can read the rest of the message as well.
That was just beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to just briefly introduce our final speaker of the evening, Rabbi David Mason, who has been the rabbi of Muswell Hill Synagogue for over 14 and a half years, soon to leave there and become the first Executive Director of HIAS+JCORE. Born in Edinburgh and previously served as the rabbi of Kingston Synagogue in southwest London. He holds a BSc and an MSc in econometrics. I knew I'd get that wrong. Econometrics, which is something. From the London School of... I'm a Jewish educator. I don't know what that means. From the London School of Economics. He attended yeshivas in Israel for 7 years before joining the rabbinate. It's a good place to join after you've spent 7 years in yeshiva. Rabbi Mason also has a Master's in Conflict Resolution in Divided Society from King's College London. I know him as a colleague, a friend, and a teacher. I absolutely love everything about him, other than his poor taste in football team, of course, I had to mention that, but hey, who's perfect? From my experience of Rabbi Mason over the many years, he's an exceptional leader to take on this new role, and I'm excited for the coming years under his leadership. It's really lovely to see Rabbi Mason's family over there. Give us a wave and we can give you a round of applause. Coming to support their husband and father. And I'm personally delighted that we've got you involved in our very special initiative at JW3 to bring Little Amal back to London, which is this Sunday. I hope it's something that you're all aware of. We've been working with Jewish, Christian and Muslim communities to bring Little Amal back to London. There's going to be a walk, an interfaith day, starting at JW3, celebrating Pesach, moving through Camden and celebrating Easter. Celebrating Easter and ending up at Granary Square with an interfaith iftar, kindly supported by Dishum, which I think has got people very excited as well. And we are really excited that you are joining us for that. And I invite all of you here to join us from 9:30 on Sunday morning at JW3 to really take part in Little Amal's very special occasion. So without further ado, Rabbi Mason.
Thank you, Raymond, and thank you very much for your support and for the support of JW3. It's so special to have that and know moving forward as well. Firstly, I don't know how I'm going to follow Edie. Everyone? And I also realize that I'm the speech between you all and food. And that's not a good place to be. But I'll try nevertheless. So my great-grandfather was a rabbi in a town in southern Germany. His name was Emanuel Meyersohn, and I take my middle name from him. But this isn't a story of someone who was murdered in the Holocaust, or survived even. My great-grandfather, my mum's grandfather, passed away in 1924. But at moments like these, I remember him. His daughter, my great-auntie, would tell me how on Sundays he would go walking with local Christian ministers into the hills around Rastatt, his hometown in Germany. His Judaism was not one that only resided in the synagogue, however important that was. It spread its light to those outside the community. The memory of my great-grandfathers always inspired me to a Judaism that struggles and strives to relieve the suffering of both our own people and others too. We are a people that have been at the forefront of injustices, and we are a people that have always expressed deep compassion for others. And not just because we ourselves were once refugees, although of course that has had a clear effect on how we act, but it's because we are Jewish. There's a Jewish story that I love. It comes from a text called the Midrash, which is a collection of stories and ideas. A group of people are on a boat at sea. One of the seafarers decides to bore a hole under his seat on the boat. The others immediately warn him, if you do as you wish, you will bring the whole boat down. But he answered to them, it is my seat. I will do what I want on it. From this, the rabbis derived the importance of responsibility, or better still, guarantorship. Just like those on the boat, we are in society all connected to each other. Unlike the opinion of a late 20th century prime minister of this country, there is such a thing as society. And so while I myself went into the trade of my great-grandfather, a surprise to my parents, I must add, and became a rabbi, I always looked to connect my community with the world around, whether through interfaith projects, civic engagement, working with vulnerable communities, or raising money for local projects. And I always looked to build relationships with communal organizations that had that agenda as well. So it was not long until I happened on the work of Edie Friedman and JCORE. In fact, when I say happened, I should probably add in it was probably because of one Professor Stephen Frosch, who's actually in the room here and was the chair of my community. Knowing that there was such an organization as JCORE was so comforting for me. And seeing Edie's passion for justice was simply inspiring. I know, Edie, that it cannot be easy moving on from an organization that you founded and built. But what you created was something so critical for Anglo Jewry. And we feel a serious sense of obligation to take the organization forward and build on your legacy. What you must know is that I and the team have deep respect for what you built here and for your constant desire to right wrongs. I always felt for you when in conversation, because there always was a sense of sadness that there's so much was going, let's say, the wrong way in the world of government. I hope you will take comfort in the work that you undertook for nearly 50 years and the legacy that you leave behind. And so JCORE moves into a new phase, one that will be enriched by our new relationship with HIAS, which will only bring positives and opportunities to our work here in the UK. Of course, we know that the way things work here and in the US are different. There is a different culture of giving and of community organization. But we are together passionate about making the lives of refugees here and across the world better. We are together passionate about advocating and campaigning on behalf of those who seek asylum. We are together passionate that the Jewish voice is heard full and clear on working against racism and building community cohesion. So I'm really excited to build forwards and upwards with HIAS, and have really gained from meeting HIAS CEO Mark Hetfield. It's great to hear you earlier as well, Mark. Along with Isabel Burton, Rachel Leviton, and of course others. Big clap for all of our HIAS friends, everyone. And others, of course, from HIAS head office that are here, as well as HIAS Europe. I've met Ilan, of course, who runs HIAS Europe, and as Mark mentioned earlier, the HIAS Israel team, who do incredible work in not easy conditions out in Israel. And there is so much work to do, everyone. Along with my amazing Deputy Director, Amos, and our amazing Jack as well, the rest of our team and our trustees, I will now look to take a few months to build a comprehensive strategy for the next year and beyond. It will look at our advocacy, campaigning, and messaging. It will look at our potential to expand volunteer opportunities through new refugee support projects. It will look at expanding and rolling out education for schools, youth groups, students, and synagogues. My aim with all this is simple. I want to mobilize the UK Jewish community to support and advocate for refugees and asylum seekers, as well as for a society that combats all forms of racism, along with growing anti-Semitism. And this will be open and inclusive. Jews from all denominations, synagogue members or not. I know it's hard for a rabbi to say that, but I mean it. Jews who support a variety of political parties and share a variety of political views. The more, the better. We will look to extend out of London and reach communities in other parts of the United Kingdom. As someone who was born and brought up in Scotland, this is definitely a priority. It will also be collaborative too, working with other Jewish and not Jewish organizations in our sector in order to amplify our voice and deepen our profile too. And we will mobilize with our values. Here are some of the values that we will use to go out to Jewish communities across the UK. Compassion, or what we call rachamim in Hebrew, is crucial. It is the basis of the desire to remove suffering. When looking at government policy anywhere in the world, outcomes need to be measured by compassion. Any government may claim to have a moral reason for its policy, but will the results of the policy cause more suffering to those who so desperately need help? Responsibility, or arvut, I mentioned before, the need to try and put oneself in the shoes of the other, and to ensure conversely that nothing we do that might help our own cause is to the detriment of others around us. Solidarity. The word I use here is shlemut, or completion. None of us are complete without others around us. And that goes for society too. We have so much to learn from other religious and ethnic communities who are part of the UK society. And coming together and being curious about others has the potential to lower intercommunal hate. Partnership, gishur. The word gishur actually means bridging, or today, conflict resolution. And I think that that is a really helpful lens for us. We need to bring Jewish people, especially young people, together with those from other communities who experience racism. We can talk about how our communities experience racism as well as the existence of racism within our communities. This work does not need to be headline grabbing. rather building cohorts of ambassadors for community cohesion. These values will become a foundation for our work supporting refugees and fighting racism. They will allow us to bring the Jewish voice to the table, whether working with other organizations in the refugee sector, building specific campaigns, or talking to members of parliament and other politicians. We may not be able to change the world, but we can put forward a Jewish case for it, and clearly. And before I finish, I would like to thank the trustees of JCORE, led so well by Adam Rose. That you need a clap, actually, Adam. Thank you for putting your trust in me to take this special organization forward with HIAS. I am also very much looking forward to work with Amos. Where's Amos? Clap for Amos! Who brings experience and passion to the table. And Jack as well. And nothing happens without Jack in our organization. So he's incredible. Who has been so loyal to JCORE. And as I've written here, by the way, and I'll repeat it, without whom nothing would happen. And of course, thanks to you all for coming. Whether you are already volunteering or would like to do so, your part in this journey is so vital. Laila tov to all, enjoy your evening, and thanks once again.
Okay. All that really remains for me to say, and really, I hope, Edie, that after hearing those words, that you would feel that you are leaving this organisation in really safe hands with Rabbi Mason and with Amos, two of my favourite communal professionals to work alongside in the community. So, as everybody in a moment gets up and takes their conversations that way rather than crowding people at the front this way, because food and drink will be served in there. It is, of course, kosher. It is from Baladi, now based at JW3 as well. So please enjoy it. Keep these conversations going. If you've been inspired by anything you've heard today, take some food and drink and carry on those conversations, because that's what JW3 is all about. And can I just ask, whilst you move over there, I'm going to ask all of the speakers to come up just for some photos together. I'm going to assume that that's something you would like to have, so I'm going to just take charge of that. So if the photographer could come and the speakers could get together for a photo, and maybe if there are trustees here, you'd wait back and then join for another photo with trustees, and then you'll join them in there and carry on those conversations. Is that okay? One more round of applause for everybody.